First up, we have the host of the Destiny Digest, a well-versed PvE Sherpa and one of the nicest people the Destiny community has to offer. A man who, as I already said, was willing to lend a hand in making this summit possible with the setup and everything in the background. Danfinity, thank you for joining the show. I appreciate it, my friend.
Oh, hey, thanks for the invite. Two of those things are true. You decide which.
Next, we have another host. We have the host of the Last Word podcast. So we have two podcast hosts on the same panel, which I actually think is really cool because you guys have spoken to so many different voices and fielded so many different opinions around the community that I thought this was a really good panel for you guys to take part in, because you've seen, you know, people who play the game at a much higher level, like in terms of skill, and they really focus on the end game, to people who focus more broadly on just enjoying, you know, the lore and the more casual content. So yeah, we have someone with some of the most helpful guides on YouTube, whether you're talking D2 or popular new titles like Starfield and Lies of P. A man I had the pleasure of meeting at GCX this year, Ebontis. Welcome to the panel, my friend. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me. Good to listen yesterday and excited to jump in today.
Absolutely. And last but not least, we have an incredibly versatile creator, both in Destiny and when cosplaying badass villains like Savathun IRL, one of the most patient PvE guides out there, willing to teach Guardians of all skill levels. Kimber Prime, thanks for joining us. I appreciate you being here. Yeah, so we have an amazing panel today, Chad. I'm really excited to dive in. And as I noted yesterday, we talked a lot about weapon crafting and kind of, you know, it wasn't, honestly, it wasn't the initial focus of the first panel, but I think it's been such a hot topic around the community that I feel like a lot of the endgame pursuit and things kind of, it all kind of devolves back to like what weapon crafting is, the loot pursuit in Destiny, which obviously is what keeps a lot of us playing. So I wanted to ask you guys as well, just to field additional opinions. How do you feel about weapon crafting in its current state right now? And we can start with Ebontis.
Oh, good. No pressure.
Yeah,
cool.
Done.
Man, this is just there's a lot of layers to this topic. There is, depending on how much do you get to play? Are you somebody who plays hours and hours? Are you somebody who gets to play for a couple of hours? And part of, you know, the idea of crafting also goes into, is this a seasonal thing that's going to be here temporarily? Or is it part of a raid? Should raids even have crafting? There's not like an easy answer for a general universal piece of this. RNG sometimes sucks for everybody, though. It really does. RNG... Absolutely. Whether you're trying to go after a raid exotic, which is kind of where some of my head goes to this, because if you're going after a raid exotic, Travis on our show had 80 raids, I think, before he got Eyes of Tomorrow.
We had some wild numbers from chat yesterday as well, by the way, that were brought up, like hundreds of clears and stuff like that. So
exactly. Those moments shouldn't happen. I mean, at that point, you've mastered the raid. You may as well basically have done everything. There's bad RNG, and then you need some kind of protection in there.
Correct.
Sometimes you will get weapons where a sniper rifle has perks that you just don't even understand. And you're going, okay, I could deal with some RNG if more of them were functional. But sometimes you'll get a weapon with a roll that does not make sense at all. I mean, unless you're just trying to do, you know, 360 no scopes or something ridiculous. But there are certain things that tend not to make sense. Now, I know there's got to be a little RNG to all of it. But I don't know. For me, crafting has been... It has been nice. I can't say it's balanced perfectly. And again, the idea that you can't unlock all the perks and be able to switch them more frequently. If you go through the process of finding 5 frames and then unlocking it and then leveling it up, but then if you want to change a perk, then it costs your currencies, and they've simplified that. So it's been this journey that we knew there potentially were going to be 50 currencies before crafting even came out at all. And then now we're at a point to where we're down to... Basically, just it's going to end up Glimmer when legendary shards go away. Glimmer and cores, I think enhancement cores will be the only things. It's already been through a journey in and of itself.
Some would say, to a certain extent, it's been oversimplified. I think, honestly, what they've done in terms of the existing system for what it is, I feel like they've done a good job simplifying it and making it, I guess... less confusing for like the general audience. As you noted, there were so many currencies that we had to keep track of, and like there were certain places you had to farm some of them, and you couldn't get some of the currencies in one place, and you were going all over the place to try and just track down what you needed to craft the gun. Like, you've already done the hard part, you collected the patterns. Now it's like, okay, I have to go through this whole extra, like, these extra hoops to get this done. So I think they've done a good job in that regard. And Ebontis, you speak on something that I think is so important when it comes to the game right now. Is you said, I'm not sure if it's 100% balanced the right way, and I'm going to let the others speak before we dive more into that, but that's kind of where I wanted to go with this specific question. Because right now, in my opinion, I feel like crafting has become an RNG solution instead of an RNG protection, as you like very eloquently noted. It's just something that it's kind of like an end-all be-all as it stands. And I'd be interested to get Kimber's opinion next on your perspective on the current state of weapon crafting.
Yeah, because I was going to say something pretty similar to what you just said, because since weapon crafting has been introduced, I found that I don't really chase for just good rolls normally anymore if the weapon can be crafted anyway.
Yes.
I just take this roll is decent enough, and then eventually I'll get the pattern and just make the perfect weapon, and easy as that, I'm done with it.
Exactly.
I don't feel like I want to really chase weapons anymore if they're craftable, just like eventually I'll get the perfect roll anyway. I don't have to put much effort into it. It's not the RNG protection I was hoping it would be. Like, if you never get a good roll, then I'll be able to craft it and then get the weapon I want anyway.
Right.
It feels like it's just the way to get the weapons now. It doesn't feel like it's chasing the god roll. It's just eventually I'll just build the god roll.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
I completely echo that sentiment. What about you, Dan?
So as a player, hold on, I'm looking at my time wasted on Destiny.
It's a scary website, man. I'd be
don't do
careful.
that.
It's
not good for your health.
Fine. I've only
We don't have a problem. We're good.
I'm almost at 5K hours. I'm 74 hours away from hitting 5K.
Yeah, just bring it up.
I am not a typical player in that regard. I feel like that's probably a lot. I also make content, so I have a money and a like I have other things that push my playtime.
Sure.
That said, crafting I think is a good solution when you're not going to give people a lot more vault space. I think it is also useful if you do not have a lot of time to sit down and hunt each week, touching back on what Ebontis said. Personally, I end up going through getting the red borders, and then I'm done with that weapon, basically. Unless I feel like it'll replace something in my kit. Which I think for the past few seasons hasn't really happened. There's nothing really that has more use case than another.
Sure.
For what I do.
What do you think drives that, like on I guess behind the scenes for you? Like, if you're saying there hasn't been loot that's like really motivated you to go grind it out, what do you think is behind that?
I think I've been playing for a long time and I just have a lot. And the stuff each year, usually for like a charity incentive, I clean my vault. I call it the Clean Plate Club. It's usually at the 5K. It's usually at the 5K, and I delete everything in my vault. It's going to probably be a little bit more expensive this year. And I think because of my ability to craft items that I've collected over the past couple of years now that weapon crafting has been in, I don't miss much. Even when people are like, "Wait, hold on, that was a god roll." It's fine. I can kill efficiently with whatever I have in my
especially with how powerful we are right now. I would argue. Yeah. On top of that, right? No, these are all really good points. And it kind of leads me into my next question. It's kind of where you guys were starting to go with it a little bit. Has Destiny loot lost its magic to you? Like, does it feel the same to, you know, get the god rolls that you're looking for? Like, do you have that drop that really just drives your excitement as a player, and you're like, oh man, today I'm gonna go farm this weapon, and if it drops for me, like, I'm gonna be so hype. I know we got that a lot in Destiny 1. We get some of those same feelings in other looter shooters right now. Kimber, I'll start with you.
I'm gonna say for me, with certain weapons, yes, certain weapons, no. It depends sort of on the situation.
Okay.
Because for me, the crafting has made the game very much checklist. I try and make sure I check off every weapon, even if I'm never gonna use it. I just want to get the pattern done, so I have it there in case I want it.
Mm-hmm.
If the case of weapons that I can still chase that are not available as crafting, for example, I was chasing the new bow in GMs this season.
Yep.
Like that was still more exciting, I found. I find it more exciting to get a weapon that you can't craft that's actually, you know, the role you want than just getting pattern pieces. That just feels like it's going through the motions for me.
100%.
So there's still some excitement, but it depends on the type of drop it is. If it's random, then yes, it's exciting. If it's a pattern piece, it's up another one for the checklist. Not
That's
exciting
such
anymore.
a divided thing, right? Like, and that's kind of where I wanted to go with this question exactly, is like, there are elements of the game where weapons aren't craftable right now, and oftentimes, which I know people are largely in favor of weapon crafting, but like if you think about it, like a lot of the weapons that really drive playtime, Hothead, you know, you've got Cold Comfort from Ghosts of the Deep, you have the Cataphract GL from Trials, you've got, you know, some of the GM loot, although I'd argue that it hasn't been the best as of late. But those weapon, you know, Unforgiven from Duality, like there's a lot of loot that isn't craftable that people get really excited to grind for. Immortal's another one. And, you know, that loot being locked behind PvP is a whole nother discussion that I don't really want to get into, but I do think that is that's a very interesting note that you made, Kimber, because immediately you said, yeah, like in some ways it's become a checklist, and then on the other side of it, you said it can be really exciting if it's not craftable. So like there's clearly that line that was drawn for you personally.
Yeah, because with just as an example, the Hothead, the one you mentioned, I probably spent like over 20 hours in the last week of Hothead trying to get a good roll for it. And
Yeah.
it was like a huge, you know, relief and, you know, just awesome, exciting moment when finally that damn rocket dropped
Yeah.
with the roll I was after.
Yeah.
So yeah, it took a lot of time, which I understand not a lot of people, you know, can invest in, and that way crafting would be useful for people.
Absolutely.
But for my grind session, like that was just such a nice feeling to finally get that damn rocket to drop.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And like to your point, not everybody has that time, but the euphoria of finally getting what you've been working toward is just, it's kind of it's an unbeatable feeling in MMOs and looter shooters, which is why a lot of them follow that loot chase, like rarity type model. Ebontis, what's your take on Destiny loot potentially losing its magic?
I mean, I think Danfinity said it earlier. We've been doing this for 7 or 10 years, depending on how long you've been with the franchise. And, you know, we used to have the whole, you know, Outlaw Rampage being one of the best roles, and everybody would just go for that thing. So you had RNG to go for a role, but then the perks were only so exciting.
Yep.
Now we have lots of different perks. Some might say we could be venturing into things like power creep. I mean, my Ikelos SMG, it's kind of hard to take that thing off if I don't have like a surge steering me a direction, because it's very useful for a lot of PvE, ad clear. Chain lightning is really hard. Like in every game, chain lightning is just a good thing to use.
It
Doesn't
is
matter what
very
game you're playing,
strong.
from Remnant, Diablo, it's just a really good thing.
Yep.
So you get something like that, and you're kind of going, okay, that slot's kind of good for ad clear, especially if no surge is involved in whatever activity I have. And we've also got the issue of some of like what made you need certain weapons. I used to need a pulse rifle that was also solar because it worked for certain activities, lost sectors or nightfalls that had shields, and if you didn't have the right thing that matched it, and part of me is very happy that we don't have to worry about that so much anymore, because it is, you would need this thing here and this thing, and you would need so many different things. So when we actually got and went through sunsetting, there were just a few archetypes that were basically not there.
Are you specifically referring to match game in this in
Yeah,
this
I mean,
setting.
match game. Yeah, match game is what I was talking about.
Yep.
So that's gone. Not as much of an issue. Yeah, if you match a shield, you get the nice pop, but it's not necessary.
Less friction.
And
Yep.
yeah, less friction, and that's a good thing for overall. I don't need half the stuff that I'm probably looking at in my vault, and I probably need to take a page out of Danfinity's book and just wipe half of it out because it really doesn't matter that much anymore.
Yep.
But also, I would say on the other side is, has Destiny loot lost its magic? I think we're at a point 7 years into the franchise that it is. I will give the weapon team massive props between origin traits and perks to really work on opening the horizontal width of what they can do with perks. I think they've done an excellent job because we get a decent amount of perks. Now, one where you like head rush, you stand up and you have more accuracy. I have questions about that one. That one's not really one I'm going to get a lot of use out of, I'll be completely honest. But a lot of the perks that they've done have actually been really, like, I mean, they're interesting. They're little mini games in and of themselves. But after a while, if you're not going to mess with, a different tier, and again, sometimes legendaries feel better than exotics because some exotics need some love, and that's a whole different discussion.
Yep.
We're at a point to where a lot of what we have can typically get the job done. Now, a new player probably has one hell of a mountain to climb, and that's a whole different issue entirely, because a new player walking in, besides the 20 pop-ups, not knowing what expansion to buy, hey, this exotic is cool, but you don't own this one thing to get it, that's a whole different, podcast. But generally, I would say a lot of the loot we have at this point is flirting with how much stronger can we get between the abilities, which I think you mentioned earlier being very strong, and now weapons with things like Volt Shot or Incandescent. And if you get the fun combination of Repulsor Brace paired with Destabilizing Rounds, and you have fun with those things going off, those are cool for all three subclasses. And then you got Hatchlings going here. Stasis feels a little weak sometimes, but I mean, most of
Which they're
at this
addressing
point
next season, by the way. It sounds
exactly.
Like. Yep.
So that one could be coming, but we're kind of at this point of how much cooler can it get before we really break the game? But also, if we don't break the game, then how excited are you to go chase something? Is this one more grenade launcher perk going to be that good? Is this rocket launcher? I mean, the fact that you can get an Apex Predator with bait and switch and reconstruction, that's a little terrifying of what you can do with a rocket launcher. Do I really need another one after I've got a rocket launcher? Shields don't matter that much anymore. That's my rocket launcher. You kind of get to that state. Now, for newer players to get through that grind, it takes you a little while to get into all the activities that might get you there. But there is a point for a lot of the player base, and what I would guess is a decent chunk of the player base, because I know there's going to be the newer players that hopefully come in, but I also worry that a lot of the population is slowly bleeding away year after expansion after season after slowly, where we get to a point where the ones of us that are still here, that are still standing after all of this time, have a hell of a loadout and enough options that if you told me I didn't get a gun for the entire next year, I still would be able to do everything in the game
100%.
and probably be okay with it. That's where it's in a weird place for me. If you don't screw with power creep and make something god tier, which a legendary exotic may as well be, then where's my incentive to really go out? And that's just kind of the weird state that it's in right now. That's where, I mean, the idea of a Destiny 3, which everybody hates the discussion, but that's a whole thing. That's a whole different ball of wax, but we are at a point of just weapon saturation where just blow up the entire game or blow up my vault. Like, I would rather be happy with a sunsetting
Another
clean
sunset?
sweep. Yeah, I was for sunsetting a long time ago. I had that debate on my podcast. I had that debate on my podcast with Cognito, and he was even against oh, don't take away my exotics. I'm like, okay, ever? And we went through this whole thing before, and but also it was the way sunsetting was executed. As we just mentioned, sunsetting was executed poorly with not that much in there, reskinned weapons, we didn't get 100 new weapons when we lost 500. We got 20, and half of them felt old. Right. That kind of thing was the issue. So
there's a lot to unpack with what
sorry,
you just
there's a
said.
lot of what I just said.
No, you're good. And I want to hear from
I do a podcast,
Dan
so I
as
talk
well.
a lot.
No, I get it. There's a lot to unpack there, right? Like there's obviously there's player fatigue and just franchise fatigue, which I think plays a huge part for us personally. Like Dan said 5,000 hours, and when he said that, I'll be honest, I was like, oh, that's actually not too bad, which is kind of disturbing to hear that from my perspective. But we're at that point where we've been playing this game. I mean, when did Destiny 2 come out? It was 2016, 2017. we've
Yeah.
been on this title a very long time, over twice as long as Destiny 1 was around. It's longer since Forsaken than it was from the launch of D1 to the end of D1. That's wild to think about. And I think people kind of forget that at times. And since we've only had one attempt at a loot reset, it didn't go well. I feel like people hold a serious negative reflection of what sunsetting could actually do for the game. And kind of to your point, Ebontis, it's like we've become so powerful. And it's not that veteran players want to strip away your weapons and you know, reduce us down to nothing and feel like we can't go slay bosses. I don't think that's the point. I think part of it is like you said with Apex Predator, how much better can a rocket be? Like what new activity is going to come out that's going to incentivize you to go chase a rocket that's better than Apex Predator? And if it is, I'm kind of concerned for the level of content that we're getting, which then leads to developers, and we talked a lot about this yesterday, you know, ultimately ramping up the level of content that you have to play, and people hate what they've done with like the artificial like underleveled activities. There's some that I think are done well. There's some that I think need quite a bit of work and attention. But then that comes down to resources. Can they actually take the time to add mechanics to master raids instead of just making them underleveled? We end up with champion spam, and that's a direct result of how powerful we've become, how powerful our loot is. So it's this cyclical thing that I think the community kind of, they split the two, and they don't really see the connection, but that's why the devs are pushing you and pushing the difficulty of things like up and up and up, is because we've become so powerful. And that's just, you know, a culmination of 7 years worth of loot that we've had the chance to continuously just get better and better and better. And like, obviously, I think when new content comes out, we all want that loot to be something we want to go out and chase. Like, that's part of the Destiny magic. When new content drops, like, oh my God, need that new linear, or like, you know, that rocket's badass, or oh my goodness, like that new hand cannon. Like when Fatebringer came out, right? Like came back from VOG, it was like, that's just hands down the best hand cannon in the game, and everybody wanted it. It was a D1 icon, right? So yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I just want to add one thing to this wonderful, joyful, when you pass it off to everybody else. One of the parts that bugs me about the loot specifically, because I know I spoke literally only about weapons. Armor at this point for me is 5/8 of your loot. And armor for me is boring. And I've been screaming about this on our podcast over there for a while, that I don't know if they need to rework what stats do in the game. This is where D3 kind of comes into play. But if you get a decent set of armor now, even the fact that you could go, Fallout had a perfect video, it was a prime example of this today, even an artifice armor, the effort you have to go through to grind for, say, maybe you get a 64 or 65 that has a good distribution. Yep. Or you just trip into a normal piece of armor that's a 67 and it's a perfect distribution. Like, is 1 point worth the artifice little? No. So if you get a good set of armor, and I know mods do help with that, but armor, the drop itself, 5/8 of our drops that we get, and don't get me started about class items, because those are, I never need to see one again.
Yeah.
But
look at my vault.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can have
Clean your vaults.
Yeah. But the idea that armor, literally half of the drops that we should be seeing in this game, I don't care about them. I mean, exotic armor is something everybody goes for because you're going for those stats, but legendary armor in any other looter game typically has something going on with it. And there is nothing there that incentivizes me to care about armor. So I just wanted to say that piece as well, and let our other two guests obviously talk about that. But armor is one that's bugged me for a while, because it's half of your loot, and that's a part I really don't care about. And that weapons, that's one piece of the discussion. But armor, that one kind of hurts me, and it's kind of an empty. There's not much to grind for. Once you get a good piece in a slot, you're good.
And I was waiting for someone to bring that up, because that is not something that was really mentioned yesterday. It's so true. Dan, what are your thoughts?
Well, let's handle the grenade that Ebontis just tossed into the table.
Yeah, that's what I'm here for.
I think so. With armor, I feel the same way. I have like a few sets that I use religiously, and I change out all the mods like as I see fit. I like the new loadout section within the game. I wish it worked perfectly, but so it goes. Round one of a system. When I don't find myself seeking out different armor distributions than what I already have, because once again, I'm pretty much able to complete everything in the game with the gear that I have now. So why should I be pushing for anything else? The seasonal armor, I get what they're trying to do with the seasonal armor, where they're like, hey, it has this special perk that is for this very niche thing.
Yeah.
I just wish it was interesting for me.
I feel
don't
like
really, yeah.
Sorry to cut you off there.
Okay.
I was gonna add on to that and give you a follow-up question. So, like previously, we had different armor affinities, which was I'm not sure was like necessarily the right way to handle incentivizing people to carry different armor sets, but there was at least a reason to have more than just like, I mean, I see people in chat saying I have one set of armor and only swap exotics. Right now, you know, it's like I feel like so much weight gets pushed onto one or two very specific stat lines, and I don't know if there's enough. I feel like the core of the issue comes down to there's not enough identity within each stat. It's almost like they're so willing to give us this power fantasy in weapons and 3.0 subclasses, but when it comes to armor and build crafting, it's like, for whatever reason, though, like other than resilience, which is insanely strong in PvE, like if you have 100 resil, that's kind of the only stat that matters. The other things like are really nice to have, right?
That's usually what I ask. If somebody is raiding with us for the first time, if they come into the chat, they're like, "Hey, I want to run this activity," and like they're dying a little bit. I'm like, "All right, hey, what's your resilience stat at?" Like,
oh, 80?
like
oh, let's bump
70?
that up.
yeah. Let's bump those numbers up, my guy.
100 or nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, let me ask you guys this question real quick too about stats.
Sure.
Is it just me, and I know this is part of how the game is built, but literally something called mobility does not make you run any faster?
Yeah,
one hurts my head a lot, and this is always one of those jokes. Like if you ever had 4 Titans high in resilience, they were slower but chunkier, and you had 4 Hunters that were like little nimble jumping beans everywhere. How would that play? How would that go in like a weird little match of PvP? I've always wondered, because I feel like Hunters in and of themselves, while they do excel at PvP for certain things, the mobility stat being what Hunters need to be able to excel at their abilities because they use it for their dodge, takes obviously away from resilience and then recovery, and then Warlocks obviously have recovery for theirs. But it's always been, I know they kind of go into those fantasies as you said, but it's also the build crafting is forced and not a build. It's just kind of what you have to do to have fun with your class. It's not really you getting to build into a playstyle.
It just comes down to the mods you have on your armor, and do you have 100 resil? Like, and I to a lot of players that's cool. I feel like though there's such a like underlying issue with the lack of identity, and being like pinholed into very specific stats, depending on like the meta that's in play at the moment. So like prior, it was intellect recovery. Right, resilience essentially did nothing like 2 years ago, and then they changed it and added DR into the game. Now all of a sudden recovery takes a massive step back. You know, your base intellect stat has much less of an impact. They extend super cooldowns, but in return you can have ashes to assets, throw a million grenades with sun bracers, and you get your well in like 5, like literally like 5 grenades. Like you get like a huge chunk of it back, right? So I feel like the stats themselves lack a bit of the identity that, and like, I guess they could just explore making those more unique and more powerful, tie into, you know, the different classes, and or even like if you wanted to be a Titan and have mobility, like give them an option. Don't just make mobility one of the, what do we have, 6 stats, I think it is. Don't make one of them locked specifically to a Hunter, or like, you know, where, you know, recovery pretty much is only useful on a Warlock right now. Like obviously it's nice to have, but it's just, I don't know. I feel like that's such a good point that you guys have been touching on, and it's something that doesn't get talked about a lot. It's always weapons, patterns. You know, I think another main concern for me is like, and I touched on this a little bit earlier, and Kimber mentioned it as well, is it's become such a checklist of like, collect 5 patterns. Did I get it? Great. Now I can go make the ultimate god roll. If I get a god roll before that point, likely gets deleted anyway, because now I can have the enhanced perks on it, which just inherently makes it just that little bit better. It has the nice gold border on it that and the little crafting symbol. And on top of that, exotic armor is something that isn't rare anymore. I know people, I guess, are
upset. You get three exotic rolls a week just from the playlists.
Yeah, like, so there's no RNG to that. And Dan, I'll let you jump in just a second, but you go run in lost sectors over and over and over again. I don't find that to be magical. You go run the Neomoon activity, which to acquire it I think is great, but it's just, I don't know, there's such a it's like a chore to grab those things instead of them being natural exciting drops.
What I was gonna say was, I think when we talk about player identity, I really feel like the exotic armor is what your player identity is, like tied with whatever your class is. When it comes to legendary armor, while it's not flavored, like it's plain rice. Like legendary gear, like armor, is plain rice. It's there mainly, I think, to help you build up in power rather than include anything spicy into your loadout. Outside of like the seasonal stuff that we touched on a little bit earlier.
Sure.
When it comes to the magic of the loot grind, I was gone while this was happening. I was in Europe and I was watching from afar, and I was like, I'm gonna kick myself for missing this, but the crafting happened. And when you could just make anything, right? And like the amount of people who were engaged in the game, who were making crazy shit because they could, I think that there is a truth to that that could be explored and exploited by Bungie to make a more interesting loot system.
Absolutely.
In the future.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you guys all make really great points, and it kind of leads me into the next question.
Can I say one thing before we move on?
Absolutely can.
Because there's one thing with armor as well that hadn't been brought up yet, which is that there are like unique perks on different legendary armor pieces, but they just suck so much there's no point chasing them.
That is absolutely accurate. No, I mean, that's the idea of, I mean, Division did it with set bonuses, and Division actually had set bonuses that mattered. Our set bonuses are like, earn a little bit more reputation, and they've been getting away from currencies, but before it was earn a little bit more of the seasonal currency, and that was it. There's no point in keeping that thing long term. There's no benefit if you're not running a seasonal activity.
Yeah.
Kimber nailed it. They suck. Like the bonuses, they suck. Like those are not real set bonuses. There's not, you probably can't do something for PvP, but like strike bonuses or raids are done. I mean, there's things they could flirt with, and they've done 0 of them, I think.
It's so interesting because it's like I mentioned earlier, I'll say it. We have power creep in so many other areas of the game. I don't know why they're afraid to explore the armor side and give that side of the game a similar power fantasy. It's just
the only
it's
armor
very
I
interesting.
keep is like if it's a raid and there's a useful mod, I keep a bond, like a class item. That's it. The rest I don't care. It's not worth it.
Garden of Salvation, I ran that. Me and a team did flawless garden, and Enhanced Relay Defender is really awesome in that raid.
Yep.
And it gives you a benefit for throwing on several stacks of that.
Yep.
Like, that's useful. That has an interesting use case, very niche. Because
that's the thing,
basically only
though.
tied to that. But
Do you want to keep a whole armor set just for when you run Flawless Garden in your vault is the question, just so you can have those mods, because that's the only time you'll ever use it.
I think that's the only time I changed my armor.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's the idea behind it, though, that is definitely like, one, I don't think the difficulty of most raids justifies needing to keep an armor set to like make you really feel like you need to go and min max. There's not, obviously we have master, and that's a whole nother thing, but I think why those things are so important in other MMO looter shooters is like there are multiple tiers of the same raid. There's savage raids that like really push you to min-max your gear, and you need everything you got from the previous raid to go and jump up to the next level. Like you need the power, you need the mods, you need everything to like go and min-max and really conquer that content.
Can you imagine a raid that didn't get beat in one day but was beat over weeks as people like gained power? And that's not what the game's designed for, but
People would quit the game.
yeah.
I was gonna say, I think the Destiny community would lose their mind. To be
they don't
honest.
understand how that works.
When we're helping somebody when we're helping somebody through a raid, and if it happens to be taking longer than like an hour and a half or 2 hours, people start losing their minds. So I can't imagine. I can't imagine what a week-long raid would be.
And I think
Totally
we
different style of game. I get that.
Yeah, I think we all realize that's not the side that Destiny's aiming to be. However,
Right.
I do feel like it's like we've swung so far the other way that like it's become such a casual experience, which to a lot of people is a good thing, but I mean, I think they've had such mixed messaging over the years of like, we want this to be your hobby, and then it's been simplified and diluted down so much that it really doesn't feel like it can be sometimes, like as like your daily driver. And naturally, I think that happens with the game being a live service and being around for 7 years. The messaging from the company itself is going to change, and I think people need to realize that. There's like frequently, that there's been multiple change hands of ownership alone of the studio since Destiny 2 released, right? They've been with Activision, they've been individually owned, and then now they're under Sony. So who knows what that looks like, and the types of players that they're trying to appeal to now could be vastly changing. And one thing that I would say is like, it doesn't have to swing completely one way or the other. It doesn't have to be just casual friendly, because in a lot of ways it is a very casual friendly game. In terms of the New Light experience, it's one of the least friendly games that I've seen on the market, which is a whole nother issue we're going to discuss later in the week. But you also need to appeal and maintain interest from that hardcore audience, which I think is sometimes done through the loot grind and kind of like the cyclical rotating activities, which we'll be touching on here in a bit. But that extra layer of like the armor depth and the multiple difficulties of like similar activities and scaling up the mechanics and things like that, I think just is not something that's in the game right now. So moving on to the next subject, you guys all made amazing points there. How can Destiny shake up their loot model as it stands right now? And Dan, since we had to wait a bit for your answer, I'm gonna start with you on this one.
Dude, I have no idea. I'm not. No,
It's like I have nothing. Move on.
No, I think there are several ways that you can make it. I'm just trying to think of it as if somebody is coming into the game now, and to make it rewarding and interesting, I think set bonuses would be awesome.
I agree.
I think targeting. I posted this earlier today because I was thinking about the panel, and I was thinking about what our ghosts do, and we have things that focus in on like ghosts, allowing us to have seek out gear that has higher resilience or higher strength, things along those lines.
Yep.
If we could, I know several people who are still not 1810, and some folks who are on that power grind now. If you could have a slot in there for like, I need a helmet to focus in on that for that grind to alleviate some of that, that would probably be
I think that
more
becomes
for
much more enjoyable. Absolutely. Yeah.
Instead of we were talking about activities that loop in on one another, just in passing, I think that becomes, it allows you to play the game how you wish, instead of like waiting till Monday until this certain lost sector is going on and you get this, you get the exotic that you're missing from there.
Yeah.
I more options just to play your own way, if you could craft. Okay. when we started talking about crafting in Destiny 2,
Yeah.
I really hoped that you would be able to, like, you got the weapon and you used the weapon and you gained an affinity with it, right?
Mhm.
And then you would be able to go out and slot in different perks to build out your perfect version of that weapon. Maybe
Sure.
it only had a pool of so many, but you would be active in the hunt for those perks, and that would be part of the loop.
Yeah, I think we talked about this yesterday. To just jump in a little bit, it was a technical reason apparently that didn't end up coming to fruition. But yeah, just wanted to point that out for the listeners.
Which that maybe speaks to like a future iteration of the game, what have you.
Sure.
But I think the way that it is now, I don't know how much it changes, and I think without like a meaningful sunset or some sort of technical change, I don't know how much it changes.
Okay. Kimber, what about you?
Like, honestly, Dan said exactly what I was going to say already. So I don't really know if I have much to add to this conversation anymore. Because it's, yeah, either, sunsetting to make the loot worth grinding for again and the loot model be more interesting, or being able to, like, combine weapons to pull individual perks off them onto things instead of just being able to craft your perfect gun straight off the bat.
Yeah.
So, like, Dan's already hit it on the head for what I wanted to say, really.
Do you feel like players would be more open to sunsetting after like a natural conclusion? I guess to me it's how it's delivered to the community, but do you guys feel that it would be, I guess, more widely accepted from maybe the more casual or players who come back and they play once in a while, if they ended up doing a natural loot reset with the conclusion of the Light Dark saga, and they're like, okay, from here then we move forward? And that doesn't necessarily need to include exotics. I don't think we're in as a hardcore player, I'd love to do that. Realistically, I don't think that happens from the just the business perspective of their game, and how many emotions are tied to things like Galahorn, and how many resources it would take to come up with all new exotic. Yeah, Wish Ender for Kimber.
Oh no, I love that bow too. I'm with you.
But do you think the community, Kimber, would be more open to like that type of reset if it were more story driven rather than just a hard like, oh, we're taking all your loot and sunsetting it?
Yeah, two things of that one. That, yes, I think if they tied it into the story, because it's the conclusion, maybe, something happens with the traveler, things get weaker, or we can't use our weapons because they're like, calibrated to us, some of them as well, through story we've learned. Just, I think story-wise, that would help. It would help, like, explain the transition instead of just, Bungie, we're going to take your weapons away, you can't use them anymore. But I do also have one question actually related to this in a way that I was curious about. What would you do with raids and stuff if all the weapons were sunset? Because then they wouldn't become wanting to chase anymore. So if sunsetting, there also has to be like, what's going to replace the loot incentive in raids then if it's all going to be sunset, especially with, what some people are saying, if exotics also got included. I personally don't want exotics to be included in that, but what's the point of running raids if everything gets sunset for people?
Well,
Red borders.
Yeah, I think part of it.
Well, and I think crafting is part of the issue of sunsetting.
Yes.
True, yeah.
Because if you what do you sunset? Just world drops? Do you sunset old patterns now? That's one of the things. Sunsetting would have worked before without crafting, but I think sunsetting with crafting existing now is a whole different problem
Another
they
can
have.
of worms.
Yeah.
I actually think that it works better with crafting because you'd be able to, like, you'd sunset all the RNG stuff, and then you'd be able to introduce perk pools that were way different than what you're able to craft.
I agree 100%. I think that's kind of the shakeup, and we talked about that a little yesterday, actually, was for me, I don't feel as though endgame loot should be craftable. The people who are running those activities are, usually the people who really care about min-maxing. They're going to run the raid enough to get, the roles that they're looking for regardless. I'm not even sure how I feel about spoils in that scenario necessarily, because a lot of times people just end up hoarding like the 220 or whatever you can hold on a character, and they just go spam turn in when the new raid comes out, and instantly once you unlock that, it's just like, okay, well, I mean, in certain scenarios, I feel like it worked. I know Time Lost Found Verdict, people farmed, like even PvP players were in there farming spoils just to go turn them in and get, you know, the chance at getting the perfect Time Lost Found Verdict, which I think is on it. That's more healthy than, oh, I'm just going to run the raid 5 weeks, get my patterns, and GG, I'm done. Probably never touching the raid again, which is what I feel like kind of happens now. So to answer your question, Kimber, the Power 4 is constantly getting pulled up, right? So if they don't do a Destiny 3, which that's a whole nother can of worms, and we have no idea behind the scenes what actually is taken, like what it would require to do that from the studio. You know, you run into this thing where the power floor gets raised up. A lot of that content would still be runnable with the power floor level loot, right? Like, because the new expansion's typically the only thing where the power matters. So like, yeah, you might not be able to bring it into the newest raid or into GMs and things of that nature, but it still will be useful in a lot of areas of the game where, you know, like normal strikes, Gambit, PvP.
Yeah, for like the casual player base and for like PvP and stuff, it would be fine. It's just like the thing I was concerned about is like the slightly higher end player base, because don't really have an incentive to run all the raids then, except for, you know, for fun or playing it with friends, which is fine because I enjoy doing that personally.
Yeah.
But I know some people only want to run activities if there's loot involved, and if it's sunset and they can't bring it to the latest expansions, they can't bring it to GMs, none of that stuff, then it feels like it's like a bunch of the players wouldn't want to run it anymore. It becomes sort of,
I hear that sentiment 100%. I think what they did last time that I don't feel was the best approach to sunsetting was they did everything at once. Like, it was like this big sweeping, just like, we're cutting off the loot from seasons 1 through 8, and I think we were on like season 10 at the time or something. So like, there was very little left that was actually usable. So maybe it's kind of like, it's more based on when it came out. And there's complications around that, obviously, because things like the Last Wish weapons now have been reprised, and those are newly craftable, so those are relatively new and exciting for players. But I feel like eventually you have to draw a line in the sand and, you know, draw a line and stick to it. I think what they ultimately did was they made the right decision to sunset. They implemented it poorly, and instead of, like, you know, working to mitigate it and fix what they had potentially done wrong, it's like they reverted and backtracked, and now it's like we're getting weapons for the second and third time with like kind of new loot pools, or like, you know, they're bringing back Hung Jury for like the third time with, you know, new origin traits and things, and it's like that, to me, like eventually that just becomes very stale, and I think people get frustrated that they're being resold the same thing over and over and over again as new quote-unquote content. So I think you make some very interesting points in that regard. Ebontis, how do you feel they could best shake up the loot model?
That already hasn't been said.
Yep.
I feel like we have covered. Well, I feel like we have honestly covered a lot. One of the things with regards to sunsetting is that old infamous line: if we're going to do the sunsetting that everybody's going to freak out about, but it was John Wisniewski or one of the other two who left, or Josh Hamrick, one of those two, was like, we're going to make badass shit, and it's only going to be around for a little while because it is so powerful. And I think that's one of the things that sunsetting didn't let them venture into, because they backtracked it so quickly, is the idea of you could have a little bit of power creep knowing that's not going to be hanging around for a while. Take something, I mean, I feel like Dado said it yesterday. How many times are you going to have Volt Shot 2.0 or something like that?
Right.
But if it wasn't around for as long, and then they could maybe do something a little different, they could have a little bit more variety if it was strong, if you knew it wouldn't be around for a while. But as everything lives forever right now in perpetuity, and now we get reprised weapons.
Sure.
And the big issue is, I mean, when it comes to sunsetting, is how much bandwidth do they have? I mean, when it comes to the downtime in this upcoming expected delayed season, I know it's not official yet, but everybody sure seems to think it will be. That 3-month gap, I'm expecting something like a reused planet seasonal activity kind of thing, and no more. Not going to get old campaigns. We're not going to get a new dungeon. We're not like, none of that stuff's going to be in there. So I'm like, reused assets so you can use a place like an expedition, but better. Just that's all. That's as low. That's my low bar right there.
Yeah.
But that's the bandwidth that they have right now because they need to focus on Final Shape. And then you have the 2 seasonal teams working on now episodes is what they're going to turn into, so they have a little bit longer.
Yep.
What is the big team then going to work on?
Yeah.
That is the big question of, is it an expansion? We've talked about this on our show, is how many episodes do you think it's going to be until we actually get an expansion? Is this the episode's going to go on until they could put a number 3 on the box? That's one of the questions that's like kind of made me wonder is how many does it go
100%.
6 episodes? And then you have 2 years to put something together because every one of the expansions has been delayed anyway. So then you just start counting them out there. If you push it a little bit farther, are you able to put a 3 on the box? As Sony is behind you, are you able to just do these episodes? Probably have the population bleed off a little bit over time. Your hardcores are still there. And then you might be able to do a 3 because we keep kind of dancing around this, like maybe sunsetting. Could they do it here partially? But you have the certain time frame and then you slowly bleed it forward. But all these weird things as opposed to just throwing a bomb into the game and putting a 3 on the box, which is not an easy thing to do. That's why I don't envy where they're at. And that's the hard part is
100%.
we know we could say we want Destiny 3, but that takes a giant team dedicated to a complete separate thing that is not helping seasons. And if those things bleed on for 6 episodes, who's left? How much money can they afford not to make if the revenue projection supposedly was missed by as big as it was it bad expectations? Is the studio at risk? Can Sony help them with all those? Those are things we aren't going to have answers to. Management decisions. Are they going to answer? If they do a 3, are they going to learn, or are we going to start over with double primaries again? A lot of questions and stuff. And I know I'm not trying to bring up old sores and stuff like that for everybody, but it snowballs really bad to a point where they need to figure out how they're going to commit and if they can solve the problem. Sorry, I'm rambly today.
I'm going to get to Dan in just a second, but I do want to... There's a piece out of that I want to pull, which is Sony acquired them for a reason, and there were sources that came out that talked about how, there was the potential of Destiny going under and Bungie going under if they weren't acquired by Sony. I'm not sure if you guys saw that, but that was something that came out last week. So beyond Marathon, I think, obviously Destiny is a huge IP that holds a lot of value, which is why they were bought out for as much as they were. And I don't just think Sony would take that leap and that leap of faith on Bungie if they felt like the franchise was going to die off, right? Like, so clearly they have something there. The other piece of that, though, and what Ebontis touched on, was the fact that people have this expectation that Destiny 3 is just going to happen instant. Like you flip a switch and it's D3 and it's this whole new game. If they wanted to do it right, it's going to take a substantial amount of time. And I think it's almost kind of written in the stars in terms of we haven't heard anything post Final Shape yet, like other than episodes. So maybe to me, like, that is kind of a sign that is maybe the route that they're looking to go, and they're not really sure how to communicate that just yet. This is all obviously purely speculation, but just some things I wanted to note. Dan, what did you want to add?
Okay, I have a few things here. So I know Joe Blackburn in interviews has said that they didn't take the 2 off of the box because of branding. During one interview. He also said that to answer the question of like, how long will we have Destiny 2 during the Final Shape Q&A at the end, he said that we have several people working on Destiny 2 for quite some time. So I don't expect it anytime like to the point of like why Sony would purchase Bungie. Jim Ryan, who's on his way out, had a huge plan for games as a service for a majority of their titles to kind of keep revenue flowing as much as possible. And Bungie right now is the industry leading, like outside of purchasing Epic. Like
I was going to say Fortnite, but
it's the industry leading example of games as a service that is quote unquote successful. After the events of last week, questionable. But when my original question though was when Ebontis, you were talking about Hamrick and Wisniewski talking about weapons as power creep, being
Yep.
like, yeah, we can bring them up because we're going to hammer them back down. Do you feel that that idea has been taken from the weapons team and put more so on the season team when it comes to the artifact?
Oh, I can talk about the artifact too, but I'm gonna let somebody else talk.
I think it's an interesting question. God, Kimber, I'm gonna let Kimber answer that one actually.
I'm actually curious what you're gonna say. I need to have a think about this a bit more as well, about how I feel about it.
I'm not sure. Honestly, I feel like the artifact is a very trivial, like it's a very polarizing thing in the game because when the artifact is good, the game feels really fun to play. This season, I find the artifact a little bit underwhelming.
Yep.
And, you know, it kind of like pinholes you into a very specific set of weapons, and I
It's
just
also a bit
don't find them that
detrimental
powerful.
with Crota's being the raid, since part of the artifact makes the orbs, which ruins the mechanics if people are spawning those everywhere throughout Crota's. So it's
Yeah.
also kind of bad.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it can add variety, but I also really am not a huge... God, I don't know. Like, how do you guys feel about the fact that they took the artifact mods off of armor and applied them to your character as a whole? Did you guys like that change, or do you find it...
Yeah, it's less.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Okay.
did appreciate that because it's just less to manage and having this
Less to
thing.
break.
Yeah.
Yeah, less that's gonna break when you go between seasons. Well, you touched on it
also-
earlier above, or I forget who. Go ahead, Kimber. I'll probably
Just
talk a lot
just
again.
one thing to add to that is that it also feels nicer, so we don't have to like anti-barrier sniper for like 7 or 6 energy or whatever it was. Like
Yeah.
some mods just felt like they were way
Yeah.
too expensive for what they actually did.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was a huge thing. Was the cost of my arm slot was always taken up by whatever I was going to be doing with barriers with. But that kind of goes into another piece. Is what I forget who said it. Is the limitation of what the artifact does. Now,
Yeah.
I wish a lot of the like probably 2 through 4 columns I don't tend to care much about.
Yeah.
It'll be a little less energy for these mods, but then you could put it on 3 or 4 of them, and most of them have less energy. It's a whole bunch of, I mean, it used to be earn more glimmer and stuff, so they went away from those a little bit. Usually it's like column 5, and then what are my champion weapons?
Yeah.
And my champion weapons rotating through, I know that's their way to kind of mix up the meta and choose kind of, but as you guys have said, that's more them telling us how to play as opposed to us building our character how we want to play to lean into whatever our space fantasy is going to be. So it's, if you want to face, like this season when I was going to solo, I did solo Devil's Lair. Previously, scout rifles were for overloads. Okay, well I pulled out a tarnished metal, had a little fun shooting stuff from far away. It was an arc surge, so that played into it. But it's like if you have this weapon over here on this thing, and then this time it was machine guns, which I didn't really feel like I wanted to use, or a hand cannon for an overload in a strike that every arena is about 2 football fields long,
Sure.
or way bigger. So then you want to play something ranged. I'm like, I don't really want to play a hand cannon. So it's this weird rotation of limitations. But then, as you said above, the 5th column is kind of, I feel like the last couple of seasons, the excitement of the artifact has been less and less. Now that's also them going away from whatever the grenade perk when grenade launchers were amazing, and then linear fusion
Breach and
rifles when
clear.
those breach and clear, and then particle accelerator for linear fusions. This is amazing. It makes those weapons almost required, but you do get to have a little bit more fun. Now everything is, again, they're just, the power creep is even less and less and less excitement, I think, out of the artifact.
And I completely agree. And I actually have a hot take on this. I think
Let's
from
hear
a like an inventory management standpoint and simplicity and like new player understanding, the new way that the artifact applies to your character is really good.
Yes.
I also think in a game where the build simplicity is so shallow at the moment, in my personal opinion, it's also taken away that like choice that I need to make of like, is it worth me running anti-barrier sniper for 7 points? And what do I give up for that? Versus just like, oh, I get it layered on top and I get everything else thrown in there in conjunction, and I don't have to make any choice at all, so I can have a crazy build and I get the OP mods. which I think has kind of led them to dilute those final column mods a little bit and reduce their power fantasy, because you don't have to make that choice anymore. So I almost wonder if, like, maybe the first 4 columns are the ones that should just be automatically applied. Like, reduce scavenger. I shouldn't have to go slot, like, you know what I mean? Like,
somebody remind me, just say scavenger later. I have a whole thing.
sure.
Writing it down now.
I don't know. Like, those I think make sense, right? Or the overload options to your character I think makes sense, but I did enjoy that sense of, like, player choice. Like, yeah, I had to give up a little bit on my bond. You know, I couldn't just run double, triple bomber or whatever it is, and, like, the artifice rezo mod and a big resilience mod, and, like, get everything and be able to run the OP seasonal stuff. Like, I love being powerful, but the lack of choice I feel like has, like, made it somewhat stale. At least to me. And then I also think
do you really feel that sniper rifle barrier should be 7 energy though? That always
I
the
don't.
prices on
the
prices on the artifacts were
yeah.
like, that was one of the annoying points to me. It's like, okay, so a little bit of choice, but it's also the cost of the artifacts were always so. I mean, the 5th column was always like everything was 6. You could never run 2 of those and that kind of thing. It was
like even
but now that
clear, right? Like that was 6 points. The people ran that because it was really strong. Like it was just a debuff you had all the time. And we don't have any artifact mods like that this season. A lot of it's focused on DR and kind of like the orb generation and stuff, which, like, it's cool, I guess, but, like, a lot of them are relatively simple. They're not. There's not a huge risk associated with Bungie putting those in the game. They don't excite me as a player. And I feel like if they made you trade off and would rebuff those final column perks and make them a bit more powerful, like, I would be super open to having to make the choice in the final 2 slots. You know what I mean? Versus now you just get them no matter what, and then they kind of dilute the pool as a result. Because I think, as you said, the last 2 seasons have been relatively underwhelming from a fun factor standpoint. So I don't know, that's kind of my take on it. But yeah, I do want to kind of shift the conversation a little bit, staying on the topic of shaking up the loot model, but these are a couple ideas that I had that take inspiration from other games. So obviously these would be longer term initiatives on behalf of Bungie, but if they continue to, you know, stand by the Destiny 2 title and the post-final shape and all these episodes that, you know, they say they want to continue pushing and pushing the Destiny universe forward, how can they maintain player investment? And this is kind of an alter point to what we talked about earlier, which was weapon crafting, right? So, like, we all talk about how we want to change the current systems in the game. This is how can they innovate and do something new entirely that, you know, maybe weapon crafting stays, maybe it gets adjusted, whatever. That's all speculation. How can they continue to innovate as a franchise? And a couple things that I came up with was a new loot rarity on top of exotics, because I think with a lot of the guaranteed methods to get them, you know, you either go run Vex incursions or you do, you know, the lost sectors over and over again, which has kind of become like a checklist thing to just acquire them. They seem much more common than they used to be, which is a good and a bad thing, right? Like, depending on the type of player that you are. Like, adding things like an ancestral or mythical level drop, you know, maybe it's like a mythical class item, or maybe it's like a super rare legendary weapon that you can get, but it's a very rare open world drop chance, or maybe it only comes from a specific set of endgame activities. And they're not craftable, they're super rare, keeps you invested as a long-term player. They can come with random rolls, but maybe they have, I mean, I don't know how they do it without completely, you know, power creeping the game.
That's
like
exactly what was going to be my first question to you, actually, was the whole power creep thing.
I understand that. So that's the first one. The second would be, and this is actually, you know, it's funny because I took a sponsored thing from Raid, as I'm sure a lot of creators have, Raid Shadow Legends, and I actually enjoyed the game. I still play it.
Yep.
So one of the things that I think they do extremely well, that I would love to see Bungie implement, and I think would actually encourage so much late season engagement with their games and their various activities, especially given how many rotators they have. Loot, like limited time events for like I think they call them they're basically like limited time like drop fever type of events. So like whether say there's like the hot dungeon for artifice armor, you get triple drops for the weekend only. Like 48 hours, they switch on a thing where like every time you run that dungeon, if you wanted to go target farm artifice armor, this is your weekend to do it. If you wanted to get 2 times chance at resilience gear, that's how they do it. You want to go run Ron and it's the weekly featured rotator, you have a triple chance at getting conditional finality. I think
they could do a lot more. That I will. Sorry.
So many things they can do.
I mean,
that
just even you
opens
think
it up.
of double nightfall drops. If you were low on currencies, you can run a hero nightfall and get like 8 enhancement cores, 3 to 4 prisms, and it doesn't even take you that long and it's match made. So I mean, if they had those just popping all over, not just hey, Trials is up or Iron Banner's here, but I mean, you go run a Lost Sector, you might get 3 exotics if you run it on Master. Make some of that stuff worthwhile.
Even
I'm absolutely for that.
Where they come from, even like imagine quick play or Trials or whatever. They're like, okay, you get double alloy drops this weekend only in quick play. Like, go have fun.
Oh, they could, that I feel like they could do all over the place.
Encourage me to go do stuff all over the game. Like, I feel like that would be such a cool way to just naturally encourage players to engage with different areas of the game that they may not normally give a damn about going into. You know what I mean? So, be curious. Whoever wants to jump in on that one, I think.
I want to just mention something from that one, because it just reminded me a bit of Warframe, which I've been picking up lately, because they have like a daily login reward, and they can sometimes give you boosters when you log in. And this could be that you get more, XP towards leveling up your individual weapons and armor. You can also you get extra resources from any source when you go and like farm stuff. So stuff like that just like generally throughout the game. Yeah. You get like a booster, but in like, for Destiny, maybe like a set time, like you mentioned. Yeah. And then it's like, oh yeah, I'm going to get, 25% more loot from things. Oh, I want to go get this thing. I'm going to go farm that. Now I have this booster. Right. That would be a lot more fun. Yeah.
Yeah. Anybody else have thoughts on those types of things, or like I guess like iterations to those ideas? Because obviously those are just things that came up off the top of my head like yesterday when I was thinking about this panel. By no means has to be the limit to anything, but those are things that I thought could kind of shake it up. And honestly, those limited time events that they do, like they already do that with double nightfall drops. So I don't think it's like an unrealistic expectation or like thing to hope for, because they're kind of already doing that in the game. I just like to see them expand on that idea.
And you can take this first.
I just mine is less on the topic, but it's more like we had fewer rotors. Like
you're roboting a bit.
Sorry.
Oh, you're good. You're good. You wish we had fewer rotators, you said?
Yeah, like when it comes to raids, I feel like if you're wanting to hunt down like a certain thing from a raid, now that we have, what are there, 9 raids in the game now?
There's a lot, yeah.
Too many for one per week.
There's a lot.
Yeah.
Like if they made it a 3-week rotator, but you were able to do 1 of 3 or like 3 different raids each week.
And I'm gonna have you hold that point, because that is literally
he's previewing the next topic.
Previewing the next topic. So no, you're good. I like where your head's at, and that's why I literally had these naturally kind of lead into the next topic. So your head's in the right spot. Ebontis, do you have any thoughts on the loot innovation type stuff?
I mean, it's a lot of what you guys have said. Incentivize it just takes me back to Festival of Lost recently, and it was just make the player's time more worthwhile. Because if you have issues keeping casuals around it and let them play more often, or if and they're always afraid to reward the people who can grind. Every live service, Division did this. They were afraid of streamers could farm this one currency, and then they nerfed the value of the currency or made things cost too much more, and then the average player can't do a damn thing with it. So be okay and know that your crazy people are always going to eat up the content too fast. They're probably going to have more currencies than you know what to do with, but allow people to grind for stuff, because it bugged the hell out of me when, I will say, they made matchmaking legendary Lost Sectors, and you know what? Those could be a struggle at time. Yeah. But at least they did it, and it was in there, and I'm okay with that. The issue was, you would get progress for the Triumph, but I didn't get my like double or triple progress for the pages. So I still may as well go run the
Right.
normal version to convert the pages, which I have to do that much anyway, as opposed to Legend. That applied to so much in the game.
Yeah.
A Legend Lost
Absolutely.
Sector versus a Master Lost Sector. The Master
Mhm.
raids need something, or just make it contest for an emblem, because Master, with the way Artifice armor is right now, doesn't really do too much in
Oh, I
it.
mean,
And then the Adepts, we've
Yeah.
Dude,
Completely agree.
I've
So-
been on a quest with my Tuesday team that I normally run with. We've just been doing flawless raids. We've just been doing that, and that's for a shader. Like
Yeah.
yeah.
anything.
Imagine like any sort of cosmetic that you unlock for like the various armor sets. Like obviously the Crota one that they brought back finally, the Age of Triumph sets.
Yeah.
They're so nice, right? Like that, but you know, for maybe the more, I guess, base level raid armor sets, like the master version should just the cosmetics, I think, and obviously the game is a business. I understand that they want, you know, some really cool sets in Eververse. They want you spending money on ornaments and things like that, and I totally understand that from a business perspective. But I think there's a lot to be said about loss leaders in a business model where, like, if you're getting players to engage such long-term, like so long-term for really cool ornaments in the game, chasing shaders, chasing, you know, amazing emblems or auras or whatever it is, I feel like a lot of that comes naturally. Like, look at Fortnite. They do so much of, like, adding to the base of the game, and it's free to play, and it's their loss leader, and they rely on that product being so good that it drives sales elsewhere and encourages you to stick with the game and play it more. And I just feel like you get the raid, Master comes out, you get your seal, or I don't care about the adept weapons whatsoever. I find very little value in the cosmetics that they provide currently. If they threw a memento in there, like on the quality of the one from Festival of the Lost, like that's a whole nother thing that they could do if they really want to go that route. Like, I don't know. I don't know how they solve that problem. I think that I know that I feel like the end game, like truly difficult activities, and that what they, you know, expect you to put your time into to earn these raid seals and things like that, and unlock, you know, these adepts, they have to be worth it, and to me right now they're just not worth it. They're not worth the time investment. So that leads me into the next question.
One thing before we just move on,
Sure, Kimber.
if that's
Sure.
okay.
Yeah.
Because you mentioned like the super rare weapons drop and you wouldn't know how to balance it. What if they did that but brought in like the Diablo, you know, green item sets principle? That you could find extremely rare armor pieces, and if you found multiple, it would give you a bit of a boost in a way. But some that could be like easier to balance than a really strong weapon drop that comes from somewhere.
Yeah. I mean, and
Please, can I say please more?
Yeah, I would love that. Or even mythicals, like they don't have imagine mythical armor, and maybe, you know, maybe it's a spin on exotics where you can only hold the one, and like, I'm not, you know, that's obviously a lot of resources to come up with all sorts of new loot and things like that. You don't want it to lead to power creep, but like, what if it's just an iteration on what already exists? So like Heart of Inmost Light. What if it extends the timer of, you know, the exotic perk to be slightly longer? You open up like a band of what that exotic can do, and maybe you increase the potency slightly. Just that like extra little bit of power creep that, like, at me as a player, as an endgame player who would actually be the one chasing those things, would keep me interested enough in that loot, because it's at least a bump in power. It's something I want to chase to make my builds better, to compete in day ones and things like that. I don't know if that's necessarily like the route they should go with that, if they make all new stuff, new tier of loot, but it just feels like right now legendaries may as well be common drops. Like they're handed out like candy at this point. They're all over the place. You get showered with random world drops like 24/7. You know, obviously crafting's in the game. Exotics are very targeted now. So I don't know. I feel like that like you can appease both. This is what I was talking about at the beginning of the segment, is like you can appease both crowds. Like you can keep the current systems if they're set on doing that, but give, you know, the hardcore fans like something to go after, because right now a lot of times the enhanced perks on crafted weapons are just straight up better than the adept versions. Like, why would I care about an adept version if I already have the guaranteed god roll from the standard raid weeks before the master even comes out? Am I really going to take the time to farm, you know, a master raid that only comes around like once every, what is it, like 6 or 9 weeks or something like that? Like, someone was talking about how there was one of the raids that came around. They're like, well, if I miss doing the challenge this time, I have to wait another 2 months before it comes around again. Like, that feels really bad. So
Yeah.
we're kind of transitioning into how you guys feel about rotating endgame playlists. I feel like this is a very underrated and important topic in the community right now, because I think there's mixed feelings on some of these things. Like, we have the rotating lost sectors, master raids, exotic missions, dares of eternity loot pools, which, like, there's no real mechanism in game to see, at least as far as I'm aware, what the loot pool that's available for the week is. How are you guys feeling about this? And Ebontis, I'll start with you. As someone who's actually, you know, you've done a lot of the like lost sector, like legend guides and things like that. So
Couple.
yeah, you've done a few of them.
1 or 2.
How do you guys feel about this sort of mechanic in Destiny as it is right now?
Oh, I mean, you guys kind of already touched on part of it, is the fact that, hey, do you want to farm the cool new weapons in Last Wish? Did you miss it? Are you available in 2 months and 7 days when this thing comes back around so you can get access to this cool new stuff that they put in the game? And you might get like once or twice in a season to go for it. I understand they kind of want to rotate the engagement around, but Dan, I mean, as you said, 2 or 3 maybe to give you options of stuff you could do, so you've got different things to go for. I mean, exotics being stuck in lost sectors, and now I think terminal overload, you have like some options for, no, what is that thing called? It's on net.
Terminal overload, Vex incursion, whatever. I don't remember
Vex,
the name of it.
yeah, the Vex incursion. Yeah. So you've got that there, and then that had its whole issue. It's the idea of, I understand they want the limitation, but if they are trying to get engagement in older stuff, don't limit it quite so much.
Yeah, there's a balance they need to strike for sure.
Yeah, I mean, the exotic missions, those are only going to grow more. So if somebody's going for an Ikelos or retrofit escapade from Operation Seraph Shield, that's not a short thing to farm. That's 30, 45 minutes, depending on what you're going for in your group, if you're solo especially. And then you turn around, there's 3 weeks later, how many times can I farm it? Then I've got a lucky first, hope I do. This is where the random drop comes in. I got to spend 30 minutes doing this thing. Hope I get the random drop. Then I hope I get the frame. And then if I don't get it done, then I got to wait 3 weeks. Maybe I'm on vacation that week. Then it's a month and a half. Then I'm just like, never mind, screw it. I forgot about it. Like, it gets to be that
it's not
far
worth
away.
your time to schedule it.
That's someone as someone who's against weapon crafting, the exotic mission loot, I'm like, dude, please let me craft that stuff as like the catch-up mechanic, which like maybe that's kind of where weapon crafting steps in, because as you said, it's such a long time between when the rotator comes back to what you're looking for, and then like the Seraph Shield example like you talked about. I think they kind of need to read the room more and be more dynamic, and when they open up the loot, which is kind of where I went with like the limited time stuff, give us triple drops for like really popular weapons or patterns when they come back and come around. Like I think Raid does such a good job of that. Like the top armor sets, they're like, this weekend it's triple chance to get that compared to usual. They understand what their community wants, the popular weapons, based on like they could monitor data and figure out what weapons are people using a lot. Are people running this activity, or are they pretty much ignoring it? Do we need to incentivize them a bit better? I think the studio could be a bit more dynamic in that sense than just being like, okay, in 4 weeks time, we're going to run a 2x, Vanguard thing, and it's on a sidearm that no one cares about. It's always some weapon that like is, I feel like rarely do they line up to where it's like a weapon that people actually want to chase and it's 2x loot. It's like, oh, cool, it's 2x loot on Mars Battleground, and it's the sidearm. Like, who's going out of their way to run a 30-minute Battleground, one of the hardest GMs, for double loot on a sidearm? I think they need to be more dynamic and read the room a bit better, especially with things like dares too. Go ahead,
They
Kimber.
kind of did at least with GMs recently, because when it was double loot, it was the Swarm, and then they ended up moving it to Warden's Law instead, because
Which was
everyone wanted Warden's
great.
Law and not the Swarm.
Mm.
Yes.
So they've done it a little bit. They just need to do it more.
Agree.
Mm.
That's a great point. Yeah, I totally agree. And like to Ebontis' point, God, the time lockout feels so bad. Like it encouraged me, like I said, as someone who is very endgame, not super in favor of weapon crafting. I was like, oh my God, please let me get these patterns because it is so miserable. I don't want to come back here. So, Dan, what is your take on all of this?
I mean, there's very little that I can add other than like if it has a master version to it, maybe make that a separate rotator or make it available permanently as a master. But
Yeah.
I think engagement is the thing that they're looking for, and that, to Ebontis's point, I feel like that is a way to get people engaged. Just letting people play how they want. I enjoy exotic missions.
Yeah.
I pop off for exotic missions. That's part of my bread and butter on the channel too, because like people come in and they're like, "Hey, I want this thing." Cool, come hang out. Like,
Yeah.
I like those things. I also like, I don't know.
If I can jump in for that as well,
Yeah,
what you
sure.
mentioned with people being able to chase what they want. I believe it was Arrivals, the really long season before vaulting happened. They had every raid farmable, and it seemed like pretty much everyone was loving that.
Yeah.
So you could just go into any raid you wanted, and you could just go and chase the loot you wanted.
It's like they save that stuff for those moments where they need something.
So they can clearly switch it on. And if
Yeah.
I think they need to
Well-
find a better balance to that, because I'd also to that point, Kimber, I don't think it's necessarily sustainable all the time, because you don't want to offer it and then it's like,
No,
okay,
not
that was
all
a
the time,
one-time
but
thing.
more.
Right.
I mean, end of every season, last few weeks, I feel like just turn them all on. That'd be a nice way for,
Yeah.
especially a
Yeah.
downturn in players every season. Hey, you got stuff you
Catch-up
want to
week.
grind? Turn everything on. Like everything's there, available. Grind what you want. You'd have people playing all sorts of random stuff all over the place, but then you'd have an option to
Yeah.
put people together, or at least over the course of the final 3 weeks, as Dan was saying, do big groups.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like they had with GMs, where you could like pick at the end of the season, although people were exploiting
Yeah.
that because they just
Yeah.
picked the easiest GMs for everything. But that type of principle, in the last weeks, you just have full access.
Eden of Chaos in chat also says a great way to get players engaged in the game would be to, let us complete the previous season's passes that we've paid for, which
Yeah, they're starting to
other
do that
games do as
before.
well.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, to that point, I loved doing the Nightfalls when all 6 were available, like grinding Lake of Shadows, and I find it a bit of a weird choice to me personally that they went back and they fixed, or like I guess made them more difficult, like Lake of Shadows and Arms Dealer and things like that. So like there's always gonna be that Nightfall or GM that's more farmable than other ones, but like I don't think that's a problem. Like if players want to go and farm that, go let them farm it. Respect their time investment. If they want to go and invest time in farming a Nightfall, go let them farm a Nightfall. Let them have fun. Don't limit it on a 6-week rotator. And this is kind of the part that I think really bothers me the most as someone who, like as you noted, Dan, like you have that bread and butter. Like mine's been like GM guides and doing things like that. Now it's like you get one weapon assigned to a Nightfall on a 6-week rotation. So like for example, if the new hotness for like say for example, I don't know if I would use the bow personally. I know Kimber was chasing it. Say the new bow comes out. If it's tied to the Mars battleground, miss me even trying to farm that weapon the whole season. I'm just not gonna do it. But if on
I
the
did
final,
farm it because it was Mars.
that's the thing, right? Like a lot of players are not like you. They're not gonna do that. If it was
Yeah, I
Fallen
know.
Saber,
Yeah, you're a rare breed, Kim.
last
We already talked
3
about
weeks,
your class items.
I actually like the Mars battleground as well. But in terms of like a farmability thing, it's it's a longer GM. It's more difficult. People aren't super interested in doing that. But if the last 3 weeks they were like, hey, go have fun. Fallen Saber's available all the time. I'd be like, bet. I'm going to go when you still have to wait for the weapon you want to come around because it's on a rotation of a 6-week cycle still. So it's like, okay, I'll wait for the weapon I want to come around and then I'll go target farm it. Like, I feel like there needs to be some adjustments made for sure.
Or they could drop more of those ciphers and let you focus whatever weapon you want at Savala those last weeks as well. So you can get ciphers from GMs and then go focus them into whatever weapon you want. So you
Yeah.
can chase the specific one you want as well.
Yeah.
There's something that so I'm playing this mobile game called Survivor.io. It's usually like just in my off time when I'm on the crapper or something. It's pretty.
Thank you for that image.
So a few hours a
welcome.
day. Yeah.
Yeah. So a few hours a day, you know, just
Wow.
because of my diet.
Gotta work on your fiber intake. I mean, come on.
But so it keeps me healthy and lean. So I'm playing this game and it has this like it has this loot box system where it's like, hey, target the things that you want. Like put that in the I'm not advocating for it to be put into a shop at by any means. But if you could target per vendor the items that you wanted, that would be nice, like a wish list of sorts for those.
Which they've done.
So
some
Yeah,
of
kind
that.
of like highlight or almost like
But
favorite the way they do the shader
Yeah.
system now. You could do
Yeah.
favorites. I mean, I swear like half of the stuff we're saying right now into the season, all of these options I think could be on the table for a
'Cause
latter
it's
part of
stuff
the season.
they've done in the past. I think that's kind of they've had bits of success doing those things. They've clearly seen spikes in engagement like when doing them. I don't know, especially like that GM thing, like where they've gone back and literally reprised old strikes to make them harder so that you can't, like, even when it is a week, when it comes around on a 6-week rotator, they're still like, oh, but don't go too crazy farming it because it's a little too easy. They went back and they made those harder. So I feel like those rotators could come back. And maybe on the, you know, you guys touched on the Master Raid thing too. I don't see why all 6 can't be available all the time, but only one of them's farmable on a given week. Like, what is the issue with that happening? You know what I mean? Like, make them all playable all the time so that you can get your triumphs done. You can go and do the challenges at any time, eliminate that level of FOMO, but just don't let us farm all of them. Make one just the farmable Master Raid. So if you really want to go and chase the adept weapons, you can go do that. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like there's so many different things, as you guys said, that they could do that would just like they almost seem like they're no-brainers. Like, come on, man, like let us have a little bit of fun towards the more dead parts of the season, like especially with the 7-month rumored gap to be coming up. Would love confirmation, Bungie, on that, by the way. But if there is a big delay, hopefully this week.
I bet this week.
I would hope so. But yeah, I mean, like, long season coming up. There's things like that they're going to need to do that are going to keep, hopefully, players engaged longer term.
I will say this. When it came to Season of the Rivals, it almost seemed like they had planned for it to be longer. And so they were like, yeah, sure. Like, go have fun.
Yeah.
I don't know if, because of the events of last week, they have the time or the bandwidth to just flip that switch. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
I would guess those type of switches are more in the
realistic.
wheelhouse. Yeah, more realistic than new pieces. That's why it's like my bar for content was reusable assets in space and the seasonal level activity. Real low expectations. So the fact that if we're just turning on what's available in those types of things, I do feel like those have got to be something they've got to think about as well. But also part of this comes back to, if we go back to one of the first topics, how do you feel about the rotating in-game playlists? Is all of these rotations really mattering if we're getting a little apathetic to some of the loot?
Right.
and we're also not the median or the lower end.
No.
Player.
True. Yeah.
What else you got for us there above?
One more thing as well with just the GM node. Like, Bungie doesn't often seem to go back on its changes, so I'm not sure if they would ever end up changing it back. Like, sunsetting, they ended up going back on. But then other things, like just a very common example that I hear about a lot as well, is like they nerfed Geomags topping off because people were abusing it in PvP, and then also in PvE because of the ammo generation. The ammo generation is now completely tied to something different, but they're never going to put that back for PvE anyway, because they're just not going to go back on their change.
Yeah. So
I was actually going to...
Yeah, go ahead, Ebontis.
Oh, I was going to say, that reminded me of my whole scavenger topic. I wanted to see you guys and chat and everything else, since there's a decent amount of group of people in here, because I've said this on our podcast, but you got a lot more in here right now as well. Does it ever bother you guys the fact that what literally could be almost half of your mods are just related to ammo drops?
Oh, I mean,
It
it's
when
literally an ammo game right now. Like
Yeah, I mean that's
Yeah.
when we talked about build crafting before and leaning into this stuff like that. Ammo is one of those things that bugs me so much. Whether if you've ever been doing a solo dungeon run and you're on a boss phase and you just can't get that heavy ammo brick to drop and you want to pull your hair out for whatever reason it's just not dropping depending on what you're running. Ammo for me should not be reserves, scavengers, ammo finders, whatever the new helper thing is for everything else.
Yeah.
That's not a build.
Yeah.
That is just how do I get over the pain? Just make ammo, like turn all those things on, and then just that's how ammo should drop, and then you could have some more fun with building and
That's
lean
such
into
a
a
good
couple
point.
more.
I miss
And
double
so-
special so hard.
But even
Yeah.
with all those
So much.
mods, sometimes your ammo still sucks. Like even with
Well,
every
yeah,
mod,
fix
you still
ammo.
get nothing sometimes.
That's why I
Oh
think
no, and
to
that's the thing I
Ebontis'
built
point,
into it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you
it's like
fix it exactly. Like that needs to
Just
be
fix
addressed at a
ammo.
base level, and then like you could add things. It's such a good point. Is
Yeah,
like
that's a random thing for me. It's just I've done enough stupid solo dungeons, and then you're just on a boss, and you're like, why? I have built into this as much as I can, and I'm still doing loops of killing ads. And when you're solo by yourself trying to do a solo flawless,
Yeah.
you don't want that one
Yeah.
stupid moment to kill you, and you're like, ugh.
well,
So-
and you have the inverse of that as well with like people running 3 cenotaph helmets, and now every champion you fire you fire 2 rockets,
Okay,
and
that's
3
a thing,
bricks
though.
fall out. I'd like,
No, but I was gonna
get
say
that.
like exotics. Having an exotic have you drop more ammo, that's not exciting to me.
I agree.
That's part of why
I agree.
exotics in and of themselves. I mean, somebody mentioned earlier about our season. Almost like you get a gimme of an exotic weapon, but an exotic that just drops ammo, that's not exciting. That's
Exactly.
that's
Yep.
not making you into a build. I mean, my Pyrogale gauntlets, those are at least fun, but more ammo, that shouldn't be something I have to use an exotic for. Sorry, I know rant just had to say it.
No, I appreciate these conversations,
Rant
and it
away.
actually it leads to an interesting point. Is like they could then change the mods to be much more dynamic. Like
Mhm.
you know, you could have an ammo mod, but have it be based on like an enemy when killing an elite. You have X% chance, like I don't know, like something. When killing an elite,
It
when
used to be
killing
that way.
red bar
It used to
enemies,
be.
you could have mods that like more directly tie to the enemies in the environment rather than like, oh, I'm just gonna throw on an exotic when I tag him with a trace, kill him with a rocket. Now 3 bricks spew out. I pick him up with shoot dilute. It auto loads my weapon. I do the same thing over again, and we don't even use a primary or secondary the entire GM. And I think that's like obviously a limited player base that does that, but it exists in the game for people who are unaware. Like, you can go through entire GM shooting rockets the entire time, like with subclass verbs and exotics and the ways you can manipulate the ammo economy. And then there's the inverse that's so frustrating, which is what Ebontis touched on, which is like the solo players, where you have all that stuff on, you can't get a damn drop for 20 minutes, and you're like, dude, this is out of my control. Like, there's nothing I can do about it. So I completely agree. I feel like that, and that just goes back into like, and it's stuff we touched on yesterday, is like, I feel like the build crafting is so shallow. Like, a lot of times it really is just scavs, mods. When I throw a grenade and get kills, it refunds super, and that's kind of my build. And as long as I have 100 resilience, I'm good to go.
I played
yeah,
Remnant a few months ago, Remnant 2. Man, can you make some weird stuff going on in there versus ours is just a base. Yeah, build crafting could be way more, but that ties into, I mean, we've got armor set stats, and then now we're talking about even more. I mean, there are options there, but that also leads to, are the systems that are in the game now or something they can do any of what we're flirting with right now?
right. Yeah. I'm going to break away from that. And so coming off the back of the rotators and everything of that nature, we touched on this a bit. In general, not just with the rotating playlists and things like that, taking weapon crafting into account, taking, you know, world drops and the rotating playlists, like all of those things, in general, do you feel like Destiny respects player time investment? Kimber, I will start with you.
It's a bit of a tough one. It's like with crafting, it's gotten a little bit easier to get the loot and stuff you want. So it's like your time investment seems a bit better there. But then I'm gonna use Dares of Eternity above with your torture as an example. Though, like in cases like that, trying to get something, it doesn't feel rewarded at all. If you're trying to like chase things in there, it doesn't feel like your time is being, rewarded at all. It feels like you're just stuck in a loop of perpetual pain trying to get the one gun out of like 20 loot drops from that activity.
I
So
wonder
it's
if I
like-
switch over. I'm gonna. Your cam won't be here for a second, but I
Okay.
wonder. Do I have? Dude, there it is. The counter. 2 of 56 drops from dares were the ignition code that I was farming for, and none of them were good rolls. It was absolutely abysmal. It was such a bad experience.
So it's like, it's mixed. Sometimes it can be worth it, but a lot of time, like in that case, it's just not worth it at all. Like,
Yeah.
it doesn't respect the time you put in. How many hours was that to get those drops?
Oh, I got 2 drops in, I think it was 10 and a half hours of farming or something like that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, yeah. It was,
Yeah,
it was,
so you gotta get
it
the
was
drop,
interesting.
and then you're also fighting the roll you won. So it's like double RNG you have to get lucky with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dan.
Yeah. I think it depends on who you ask. I think for veteran players, people like me, people like you, people like everybody else on this panel, it probably doesn't respect our time as much because we have a lot and we've spent a lot of time in it. And for your median to like sub 20-hour player, 20-hour a week player, I mean, with crafting, probably.
Yeah.
With being able to I enjoy what they're doing with the raids, where they're like, hey, if you don't have the raid exotic, then if you complete these triumphs, it gives you better chances.
Love that.
That is respectful of your time. There's an investment to it. And
Does it
like,
say how much each of those actually improves your odds, or are
think
they
it
not
does.
transparent about that? Okay.
I don't think it does, but
It doesn't say it, no.
it's enough to like that I've seen it actually to work really well for people who
Right.
normally I'd steal it away from them.
Right.
But I honestly, I think it really depends who you ask. If you're asking me, I'm not playing as much right now. I'm playing other things. Not so much because my time feels disrespected. It's just I've done a lot.
Yeah.
And I've finished what I think is major for the season. But yeah.
65% of chat saying sometimes but not often. And I think that pretty much accurately, showcases the issues with it. And I'll get to Ebontis first before I touch on that more.
No, I mean, you guys kind of nailed it. There are moments where kind of, whether it's you get a crafting pattern, I didn't have to go through the RNGs as hell of trying to get it. But on the other side, when I mentioned you've got Festival of the Lost, and if I could do something more difficult, I'm not rewarded for my time in the way that would be equal to a lot of other things. There's why is a legend master lost sector versus a master lost sector, the drop rate, people have done the math after the crazy people who run thousands of those, the math is not worth the level of difficulty jump. And I think that comes into the level of difficulty, like what is legend to master to grandmaster? Sometimes either too easy or too hard. If it's too hard, it never feels like it's worth it. But if it's too easy, then maybe the loot isn't quite there. I would go ahead.
But if you're a newer player and you played Festival of the Lost and you got those Ingrams from Festival of the Lost, you could turn that in for an exotic Ingram that you hadn't had unlocked, even if, like, I feel like that's respectful of a certain player's time.
Yeah.
No, that's fair. Like, and that's kind of the thing is like the eerie engrams for, again, as you said, situational depending on the player, but also it was just the idea. It's more the being equally respectful of if I put my time into a difficult activity, say you want to go get spectral pages. I ran a Grandmaster Nightfall, and I got the same amount as a Vanguard playlist. If you run a Grandmaster and you can get 15 pages or whatever, yes, some people are going to farm them, but how many are going to do that? But at least you reward the people who put together a group, have the skill level to beat a Grandmaster, and then maybe you get 12 or 15 pages. Yeah. Oh no, they've done the activity faster. Those people live in the game anyway. They've already got 7,000 hours in the game. That's kind of those are the points where you go to a raid and you get next to nothing, or dungeon encounters are like 1 page. those are the times when they steer you to like that main playlist section that's just like your basic stuff to fill that up with people for the holiday event because it's free.
Right.
That's the time where if you do go do something else, it's not. But as you said, for newer players to get exotics, that's not bad. You run your 3. I can go run 3 Crucible matches asleep and get an exotic engram roll.
Right.
Yeah.
So then you get to the value of the loot. But it's like, does that respect your time? A little bit more.
And that's kind of what I wanted to accomplish with this question. Is it's not a straightforward answer. I find a lot of times the newer player respect for time investment is so much greater, and in ways that makes sense, right? Like they should be more casually introduced into like the end game loot side of the game, whether it's like, you know, unlocking a selectable red border each week on seasonal content, or, you know, like you said, like the match made activity, being able to focus the eerie engrams and or whatever it may be. But then, yeah, again, on the flip side of it, I think one of the things we already touched on, like the rotating playlist being just unnecessarily, you know, FOMO, which is something that I think Bungie is proud of trying to eliminate in this MMO, is like they bring a lot of things back multiple times. They try and, you know, give players who may have missed those seasons a chance to reacquire those weapons. But then, you know, I don't feel like there's always that same level of love and care that's equally distributed across every playlist. Like Kimber noted my experience in Dares of Eternity. Sweat had a whole like series. I think he spent 60 hours getting the role that he was looking for on Ignition Code, and that's, to an extent, I want some layer of that to return. But when it's like it takes that long because it's a 1 in 23 chance, because there's 23 different drops that just randomly drop, and you have no way to target farm it whatsoever, that's where I feel that it feels like really bad to try and go in, and like it could have been a hell of a lot longer. Like mathematically, it could be 250 plus hours until he finally gets a usable role. I think he actually got kind of lucky in that scenario. So I would ask them to look at things that work in the early game and potentially apply them a little bit in the late game. And then like it's a tough question because the inverse is, you know, weapon crafting, and you get your 5 patterns and you're done. So like I'm not a game developer. That's not our, you know, our area of expertise, but I think there's areas that are too easy, and there's areas that are just egregiously like unnecessarily difficult to get the type of loot that you're looking for, especially for a game where they try and eliminate FOMO.
Can we also have a word about raid exotics with this section? Because there's a couple
Oh,
of different...
yeah.
Absolutely, please do. I would
Because
love
there's
to hear
also
that.
different ways to acquire raid exotic, and like which method people prefer is going to vary greatly per person. Because we've had the just straight up random drop, which has now been changed to also have, you know, certain triumphs to increase the drop chance on raids and dungeons.
Yeah.
We've got the complete opposite of Divinity, where it's just a straight up quest. So if you put the effort in, you're just guaranteed to get it. There's no RNG involved. And then we have kind of the mix of the two, which was the Crota contest, where if you put the effort in on contest and got the clear, you got the weapon guaranteed. But if you didn't get the clear, you had the RNG way of getting it later.
Yeah.
So there's like a whole bunch of different ways of getting exotics too. And like different people prefer different methods when I've been talking to them about it.
Those are great points.
The biggest thing I can say about everything in Destiny, if you wait anywhere between 3 to 6 weeks, the Bungie is probably going to change something to make it easier. All the time.
The max drop chance of the Crota thingies, whatever they're called,
Yeah.
just get it done in one go.
Exactly,
I
you
needed 2
get
more,
lucky.
and I got 37 all of a sudden from Crota in one go.
Yep, that one.
It's a great point, though, Kimber. It's interesting to think about all of the different ways that exotics have been acquired. Like, personally, for me, I'm not a huge fan of, like, the one-and-done exotic mission type of acquisition, because, again, that just kind of goes back to, like, the checklist type thing. I'm not against them doing it once in a while, though. Like, I think, you know, they've done that once. I think the Crota approach was interesting. But I also,
it's my favorite so far.
Yeah. I also just I don't think the, you know, the 0 for 100 is at all the method in modern day looter shooters at all either. So I think either what we spoke to earlier about how, you know, you have those like chances to like those limited time events, triple drop rate or triple drop chance on the exotic in, you know, the weekly featured raid, whatever it may be. So if you need that, it's like, oh my god, this is the weekend I can go and do it.
Yeah.
Or, you know, they build more into those triumphs like you were talking about, and maybe progressively adding like a mercy timer, maybe 1% chance higher every time you clear the raid on a looted clear and don't get it. Maybe that like in conjunction, so after 30 clears or whatever it is, you're guaranteed the exotic. Because at that
Don't
point,
they
it's
have
like
that, but it's just like really low. It goes up every time.
Yeah.
Or did they remove that with the triumphs? Like
It's
being
probably in
added?
there, but I don't know if anybody's ever got anything good out of it.
I
It feels like
honestly
it's there. It's like
don't know.
0.01. You're up to 0.04 now. You're doing awesome.
You're
Yeah.
doing great, champ.
I don't know. So something to, I think, respect a player's time investment in that sense. Like,
Yeah.
because I can't remember who mentioned it earlier, but at that point, it's like you've put in the time, you've earned the weapon, and you still want
Yeah.
it to feel special and exciting. So I don't think it should be a handout either.
Yeah.
Dan, do you have thoughts on that?
So Divinity, I think I have a soft spot in my heart for like bespoke side missions.
Yeah.
In things, and Divinity definitely felt like that. Like the steps to get to it, it's been so long ago since I've had to do it. I know that those can be a little bit I think those were a little bit strenuous at first, but I think the I like the bespoke side mission exotic quest thing that Divinity does, because it is entirely unique to that raid. When
Yeah.
it comes to like I think there's room for the Crota experience and the Divinity experience.
Yeah.
Because the Crota experience, I think if you went and did the challenge mode, if you went and did that the first weekend, you should get the exotic. 100%.
Yeah.
If after that you're doing triumphs and you're working your way toward it, that's also viable too. So I'm
Do you think the
like
Divinity
that.
method, Dan, is a good... Do you think it keeps players engaged enough in that, like, considering we get one new raid a year,
Mm-hmm.
do you feel like that engages players enough, or should those guaranteed exotic quests maybe be put elsewhere in the game, in your opinion?
I think I think that there's room for both. I think
Okay.
sometimes you do a guaranteed, and sometimes you do one that is, you know, up to chance.
Yeah.
When it comes to like engagement, if it were all 100% one and 100% another one, that's where the complaint would be.
Yeah.
Right?
For sure.
If without variety, we would be complaining.
Yeah.
But I think there's room within the game, within these activities, for both. And I think both are viable for those specific rewards.
Sure. Fair enough. Anybody else have any additional thoughts on this?
No, I mean, I think you guys covered it. The fact that you could, I like the fact that if you had a puzzle to solve, because Destiny loves its puzzles.
Yeah.
Obviously, yesterday
we
was
love Destiny's puzzles.
yesterday was a prime
You-
example. So if there's a community puzzle raid and you're going through and putting binary code in for Wrath of
Yeah.
the Machine, that is absolutely insane craziness, and that's like a memorable event.
Mm-hmm.
But also on the other side, when Kimber said there has got to be some type of protection, so she was up to 33. You were, and then you got a couple more.
Dude.
Yeah, I was up to like 33-ish thing, and then I got the immediate like mass loot drop, which gave me 37 in one go because I already had the gun from contest. I just needed the catalyst, and I was like almost there, and then it just
That's
dropped
wild.
enough to complete everything on me.
Yeah, so it's like if you were, but you were on the way, you were on your journey, and one or two more, you would have had it. So the light at the end of the tunnel has to be there, I guess is my point,
Yeah.
because if you do a cool thing to get it, that can feel good. As Dan said, it has a place.
Yeah.
But also on the other side, 0 of 100 sucks, and everybody knows that completely.
100%.
And I went through D1. My friend filled out his heavy slot with Galahorns before I got my first one. So I will always probably tip in the way of like, I need some type of guarantee because I don't want to go through the 0 for 100, because you see people raid 3 different characters every week. They have mastered that entire thing. Now they're you don't want to drive somebody to the point of where they're tired of running the encounter.
Yeah.
That's my issue. It's like the RNG has its moments, but I mean, if you get it 1 out of 20 raids, that's still going to be, hey, cool, I finally got it, as opposed to 1 out of 100. That just hurts everyone involved.
I'm a little giddy at the moment because I just saw a comment in chat, and I think it's an outstanding idea to balance it in the game. I think there should be a quest after a certain amount of runs, if you haven't gotten the exotic, that opens up to guarantee the exotic. Can you imagine if they did the Divinity, so after 25 clears, you get to do the exotic quest? And even if you already have it, 1, if you get it early, that's exciting. 2, if you don't, you get to go through this cool, like, quest that drops in your inventory, and now you get to go experience that. That's almost kind of like a, hey, we're sorry you didn't get it, but you get to go get it guaranteed, and here's, like, this cool experience. That's such a cool idea, Soda.
Can I be, like, a corporate Bungie hat opposite side of this for a second?
Sure.
When they go to make cool content, if they do something on the level of a Wrath of Machine quest, they want everybody to experience that.
Yeah.
So how big, how grandiose of a quest do you put in for the unfortunate RNG? I guess that's the question.
Well, I think there's places for the ones like Outbreak, right? Like that was a unbelievable community type of event type thing that I think that has a place. I think, you know, I don't consider the Divinity puzzle like some grandiose thing that should dictate an entire season that's going to pull players to the game. Like it was cool. I enjoyed it, but it's also, you know, you're connecting some dots.
Are you going to be the person on Destiny LFG that says, hey, I was unlucky and I have this quest now. I can get the raid if you guys will all help me with this thing that you don't have to do, but I do. I'm playing devil's advocate to be a pain in the butt.
Right now, though, for players who need it, like people who don't need to, like finding people to run Divinity.
I mean,
get
that's
people
fair
in my chat
for that one, that example. Yeah, I'm just thinking I'm playing devil's advocate in the room just to see how the answers come out.
I almost
you put on your corporate suit.
Yeah,
he did. He did indeed.
There's also the flip side. I was thinking about, and someone in chat also just mentioned as well. Like if they do add something that's, you know, somewhat cool, if you get the gun, do you still get to do it? Because then it's like, why are you doing it? But if you don't do it, and you miss out on this piece of content. So it's also
what
like
if when it randomly drops, you get the quest as well, and you can either delete it or you can go and run it. And
what if contest was always available and you could just choose to challenge contest, and then once you understand the raid, then you could push for the hard version?
Now this is getting out of control. We need to.
Everybody temper
I'm sorry.
Stop it.
I'm sorry to be logical. I apologize.
No, that's too funny. I completely agree though. Very cool idea coming from chat. So final question, because I know we're running up against time here. What is the number one? We did, and we don't have time for it, and that's okay. So we're gonna dive into this, and I
lightning round,
lightning round moment to make sure we get you guys out of here on time. This is by no means you speaking for your entire community. This could be, you know, sentiment that you've seen frequently when streaming or in your YouTube comments or whatever it may be, or this could be just your personal opinion. What, in a few sentences, what is the number one priority for you and your community heading into the final shape?
Who's going first?
I will leave that open to anybody who wants to start.
Rock, paper, scissors for us?
All right, mine's probably pretty simple because it's kind of vague, but it's something that Bungie has to do. And I think what they have to do for me and my community, because this is going to counter the comments in YouTube videos that say, hey, when Final Shape, I may see Final Shape story, but when I'm done with that, I am done. What I think Bungie needs to do to everybody involved in this game, from hardcores to casuals, no offense on either one of those titles, is why am I going to keep playing post Final Shape?
Amen.
The first episode comes with Final Shape, so we're going to get a tease of those 6-week content chunks, which may be a little better for some people. But this is where we need one of those communication Joe Blackburn Twitter videos to be real and say, we want to know what the future is. Again, I've joked with Travis, like how many episodes? Is it 4? Is it 5? Is it 6? Is it 12? How many episodes are we going to go on till we get an expansion? Is there an expansion? Is there a 3? I know it's early for them to mention some of that stuff, but if they're just like, it's episodes for the foreseeable future, if that's all they say, I worry about how long the bleeding of people is just going to continue.
Agree. Yeah.
And I think that's where, for me and anybody who plays Destiny wants to know why I'm going to log in 2025.
Yeah.
They said it's going to go on for years. Weapons are going to be made for years, but what am I going to do with them?
That was actually mine from yesterday. Was very similar sentiment to
Okay,
that.
fine. Hold on. You guys go.
No,
I'll
no,
come up
no.
with something else.
I
No.
mean, I think it's great that you said the same thing, because it's like, we have a very tight-knit community. There, people care deeply for this game, and you know, making sure that this franchise makes it long term, right? Like, we all play this. Going back to Dan's 5,000 hours and me saying that, I was like, wow, I'm surprised it's not more. We have ridiculous amount of time invested in this game, in this story, in this community, and despite all of the things that are going on, we want. I think it's not an unpopular thing to say that we want this game to succeed, not only, you know, for our own personal reasons, but also like the devs put a ton of hard work and blood, sweat, and tears into this game, and we want to see them succeed and continue to create cool things. If I have no idea what to expect post Final Shape, to me, like, it's just a black hole. Like, is there a Destiny 3? Is there not a Destiny 3? Are we doing seasons? Are they doing a reset? Is Destiny 2 staying around? Is there focus marathon? People's minds start to wander, and you just don't know what to expect as a Destiny fan. So I think it's owed to us in some, at least if it's a teaser, you know, at a major convention or something, there needs to be communication on what's happening after the game. And I think your point on keeping me invested post the 2 weeks Final Shape is also something that's completely fair. Kimber, let's go to you for the next take.
Yeah, for me, like, it's pretty similar to what Ebontis said as well, that like my community and myself, we want just to know what's going to be happening post Final Shape, because some of us are sticking around and will like experience the Final Shape. Some people have refunded. It's like a mixed bag of what people are doing. But we have no clue what's next. Like, we know there's episodes, but as you said, how many? Do we still get 2 raids and 2 dungeons a year? Is that going to be changing as well? Because a lot of people like really look forward to those as their main point for coming back.
Because now
So,
there's
like,
only
how are they
3
going?
episodes, right? So
Yeah,
that's a good point.
what are they going to do?
18
like-
weeks apiece.
How are they going to retain players, but also bring back players who have potentially, you know, quit the game? Like, are they going to be doing something interesting that makes those players go like, oh, maybe I should try Destiny again? But like, for like my main raid team, for example, a bunch of them are probably quitting after Final Shape raid. Like, they're not going to play Destiny anymore because the endgame difficulty is gone for them. Everything's become too easy. So like, it's like
Yeah.
just a mixed bag of like, what is next? What are they going to balance? What are they going to change? What is it going to be? Is there going to be expansions or not? There's just so much uncertainty going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Dan?
I guess a satisfying ending is kind of what I'm hoping for when it comes into the Final Shape. And I think that that's a lot of the community too. Like, because if they've invested 10 years in the franchise, the Avengers Endgame moment of it all should be satisfying. And
It has
shouldn't
to
feel like a
really
cop-out.
pay off. Yeah. Yep.
It really has to pay off, especially with how much we paid, like, spent time with all these characters.
You just don't want Game of Thrones season 8. That's all.
Exactly. Yeah. I personally, this is outside of a game thing. I want to see every developer who worked on the Final Shape. I want their name in the credits.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's it.
Wow.
That's
That should be the bare minimum.
Well, all right. Well, way to come in with the honorable response. Jeez.
look, man. They get work that way.
Oh, I know. Believe me, I
True.
know. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
Yeah.
above. Do you have a new one? Since I've now copied and pasted yours from
You did
yesterday.
not
and didn't know
copy
it.
paste. You added some very interesting thoughts, and like I said, you know, when we share sentiments across various panels, I think that's when the community focus of it really starts to show. Is like, there's creators who have never interacted with each other. There's members of the community and people in chat that are part of your communities who weren't involved in yesterday's discussions that are showing very similar sentiments. Some are different, but I mean, a lot of the things we've talked about, there's, you know, weaving narrative like across multiple communities, across multiple creators, and I think that's a powerful thing to showcase. Even if if you share the same opinion, that just goes to show that, like, you know, it's more of a commonality than it is, you know, oh, it's just a one-off opinion that is can't really be taken seriously, or like maybe they're way out there with some opinion. Like I think it's a valuable thing to see. For me, another really important thing is player progression, unlocking the world in Final Shape rather than it being time-gated activities, and getting away from the standard 2 encounter 2 boss format of the raids that we've come to know in like the last 3-4 years since Last Wish. I find that it's kind of just the status quo, and if this is really like the big final epic battle, I want to see it be a big raid with a huge the biggest bad we've ever fought, which the Witness is. Like, that fight needs to be so satisfying, and I know that there's a lot of pressure on those teams to deliver that, and I hope that they do. That's kind of one of my other biggest wants is just if you have a great raid, I generally like that's a huge part of the sentiment of a DLC being successful, aside from the campaign and the loot. Like it's such a benchmark of the success of a campaign. I mean, look at Ron and Lightfall, right? Like Root of Nightmares is not looked at as probably one of the community's favorite raids. Like I don't think it involves enough people in a fire team to keep things interesting.
It's the new raid people are calling a dungeon with Crota haven't been reworked now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like it is literally. I mean, I talked about it yesterday. Yeah, it's a training wheels raid, which there's a place for that, but the raid has been solo flawless without using exploits, oobs, or anything else, just doing the mechanics how they're intended to be done, which, if you think about that, is wild. From like where we were with like Spire of Stars and needing literally 5 of your 6 members to be like actually actively participating in mechanics to, someone can do all 6 people's worth of mechanics legitimately and flawless the raid. Like, I don't know. I hope the raid delivers. I really do, and I hope they are able to roll out content that just makes the community proud and feel like they've paid off a long story that we've been waiting for a really long time, especially with the delay coming up. It's going to be kind of, I think, a necessity, honestly. But yeah, that's those are my thoughts. Any closing sentiments, my friends, or anything like that?
I just want to say thanks for doing this. Putting
Thank
this
you.
entire thing together, getting the content creators that are going to bring different players' perspectives. Like you had Glad on yesterday. I mean, it was interesting to see how he spoke from a perspective of somebody who's been dedicated but then fell off and went full variety, basically, except for the big releases.
Yeah.
And Dado sitting right next to him in the same place. You've got us in here today. You've got more people covering different topics. I would say don't be surprised if developers are going to look at all this stuff and listen and probably, cheer off half the topics that we have if rumors to be true that they want some of these changes along with us. Now, we don't know what they can and can't develop due to bandwidth and resources and everything else, but the sentiments are seemingly probably a lot of the same. We are all, it is a game of potential. I think that we've all had Destiny. There's always potential for more, but it's also a game of, we're all passionate about this thing. If you're apathetic about it, you don't care. And I think that's one thing. Nobody wants to be apathetic about this thing we're passionate about. And we would like to know why that passion can continue.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
If you're having a bad time in your hobby, you're having a bad time.
Yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely. Well, thank you guys all so much for being here. I know it was a big chunk of time to take out of your day. I thought you guys brought just excellent discussion on things that were not covered at all yesterday, and God, I enjoyed the heck out of it. So thank you guys so much for being a part of it. To everybody watching, to the chat right now, all of their links are on screen now. I hope I got all of them right. But please go follow them on their socials, their Twitch, Twitter, YouTube, everything. And again, thank you guys so much for being part of the discussion. Yeah, we'll hope for the best leading up to the final shape over who knows how long it will be, but hopefully sooner rather than later.